Hello, everybody. So I am Tom Hill, and it's nice to see everyone. So I am here with Cindy Jones, and we are going to be talking about bilateral stimulation today. I'm excited to have Cindy join us, and we're going to talk about just why she's here and the knowledge that she has. But I'm also going to just toss it over to Cindy because she can introduce herself and tell you why she is here. So Cindy, welcome.
Okay, well, thank you. Just so everybody knows, I've probably only been a part of this community, I don't know, maybe a couple months. I didn't know about it until then, but super grateful. So I've been a therapist for over 26 years. And so back in 1996 is when I got my master's degree from the University of Utah. And I've done community mental health for several years. And then I switched over to private practice, and I still do that right now. And when I was trained in EMDR therapy, it was about 16 years into my practice. And so I'd already been a pretty seasoned therapist, and then I was trained in it. And probably like a lot of you, I could just tell really quickly that it was a much more efficient therapy than what I had been trained in for trauma reprocessing. And so when I do trainings like in communities about it, I just say it's kind of like when doctors went from, traditional surgery to laparoscopic surgery, and the standard of healing is the same. It's just more efficient. And so I was very grateful to learn that therapy. And in Southern Utah, at that time, there was maybe 4 therapists in all of the southern half of Utah that had actually been trained in EMDR therapy. And so I was really committed to bringing that to our area. So I became certified, and then I became a consultant, and then I was the regional coordinator for probably 7 or 8 years. And we now probably have about 150 people trained in EMDR therapy in Southern Utah. So I'm very committed to this therapy. And then probably about 6 years ago is when I started working on really expanding my knowledge about bilateral stimulation and how you can use it outside of therapy. So
that's exciting because that's why we're here today, is to talk about bilateral stimulation. So Cindy, let's define that. What exactly is bilateral stimulation?
Well, for all of us, I mean, we all know where we've been trained in EMDR therapy. I think all of us would, know that it stands for BLS is bilateral stimulation. And when we're using it in therapy, we know that it's, the alternating right, left, whether it's eye movements or tactile or auditory. But if after this presentation, if you feel like just searching bilateral coordination or coordinated bilateral movements, you're going to get a lot of information that's going to come up that actually predates EMDR therapy. And so that's what I just want to share with you, is just that there is a lot of information actually that we engage in every day that's considered bilateral coordination. So we can talk more about that.
So it sounds like there's a long history to bilateral stimulation or bilateral coordination. Tell us more. Like, this is the time where I was thinking, like, sitting around the campfire, like, eating s'mores and just listening to stories. So tell us stories, Cindy.
Okay, you brought the s'mores. I went to that first training just like all of you, and I heard that story about, Francine and, just the spontaneous rapid eye movements, and she felt calm and, went from EMD to, the whole story. Now it's full EMDR protocol. And I would have thought, that was the very beginning of bilateral stimulation, because you don't know what you don't know. And other disciplines, though, at that time, I didn't know anything about occupational therapists. And so when I met some, what I want you to know, especially the pediatric occupational therapists, they have actually been working with children, but adults too, with specific bilateral coordination movements. And so if someone is struggling to say, just maybe they're not really coordinated, or they maybe didn't crawl, they missed some developmental stages, so they're delayed, they actually have specific exercises for them, and it predates EMDR therapy. And so an example would be if it's like symmetrical bilateral coordination, that would be like jumping jacks, or it would be clapping. But the section that fits us the most is the alternating bilateral coordination. And so if you think about it, babies crawl and we walk and we run, we hike and we drum and we swim and we dance. So we ride bikes. So we are actually engaged in bilateral coordination every day of our life. And so And I also want you to know, when you think about it, when someone comes into your office, they're actually engaged in alternating bilateral coordination. They sit down, they have a session, but when they leave, they actually are back engaged in bilateral coordination. And so it definitely predates EMDR therapy. And why do they do that? Why do occupational therapists do that? And I want you to know that we met with a group of them, and a pediatric occupational therapist came in, and he said the reason that all of it's focused on like crossing the midline when they're doing the alternating movements is because that middle part of your brain is called the corpus callosum. And think of it like a telephone, like it's got to get both sides to communicate. And so people that struggle in that area, even in reading, then they know they've got to actually help that communication. And so that's why they do all those activities. I find that fascinating, because then in a minute we can talk about how we're expanding the use of bilateral stimulation. But even if you keep it in the arena of EMDR therapists, I don't know how many of you had a training with Mark Grant. He's a psychologist out of Australia, and he was the president of Australia, like EMDRIA Australia, for several years. And you can look up his website. It's called overcomingpain.com. And he was one of the first advanced trainings that I actually went to. So I didn't know that there would ever be caution about using bilateral stimulation outside of therapy, because he was probably my second advanced training. And before the smartphones, he had CDs, and he had, so it's all tones, but it would be bilateral tones to reduce anxiety, and bilateral tones to reduce pain, and bilateral tones to increase your ability to sleep. And so now there's apps, and you can actually download that, and anybody can download that. And what was interesting, before we created the tappers, so you go to the advanced training and you learn about the equipment, things like that. But then I go to his training, and it's on an app, and it's just the tones. And I was working with a college student who had really severe test anxiety. She was a nursing student, super smart, but she couldn't pass the test. So, if you take the brain model with Dan Siegel, like, this is the smart part of the brain, but the amygdala was trying to take the test, and it was just panicking. So the tapper, not the tappers, now I use tappers, but the tones, we got permission from her professor to put her earbuds in during the test, and she scored over 90%. So I'm like, wow, there's something to this. And so the reason we went on to create the tappers, even though there's tones available, is just because a lot of people, I work with a lot of first responders, and I work with a lot of traumatized people, and they didn't want to have earbuds in when they tried to sleep. And if it's a first responder, they can't be on a call, and they can't have earbuds in. And so we wanted to create something that they get the benefit of bilateral coordination, but it's more user-friendly. Not that tones aren't great, they're great, but you just have to use them in specific instances rather than anytime you need it. So
Cindy, tell me a little bit more about just like, for example, the person taking the test and like the bilateral stimulation. What is that doing behind the scenes to help that person score that above 90%?
Well, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Robert Scare. So it's SCAER. He's a neurologist. He actually passed away last year. But back when we were first really looking at the expansion of this, one of his books, I'll just look at the title of it. It's called 8 Keys to Brain Body Balance. What he said is we can actually use fMRIs right now, and we can actually see specifically in the brain what is happening. So what he believes through the fMRIs is that the bilateral stimulation is activating both sides of the brain. And so it's actually inhibiting the amygdala. So your thinking brain is coming back online. And that's his belief. And so if he were here today, that's what he would tell you. He would say it's the left-right activation is calming the nervous system down. So then your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, is coming back online. And that's why a student can take a test, or we have kids' reading scores going up and math scores going up, because if it's an isolated resource, they're just getting the benefit of the bilateral to help that middle part of their brain communicate, help both sides communicate better. So it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. So,
Mm,
quick question then, because
sure.
I have heard bilateral stimulation and dual activation stimulation sometimes be used interchangeably. And I know that you have some thoughts on that, and I'd love to hear those thoughts.
Well, if I was looking at some of the training manuals just because being a consultant, I mean, if I was trained 10, 11 years ago, there's probably been 2 or 3 manuals since then. And so I was just kind of looking through it. So I'm just going to look down and just read this part. Um, Even in one of them that I have through HAP, it just said dual attention stimulation. So they're calling bilateral stimulation and dual attention stimulation the same thing. I think they are using it interchangeably. Um, but in therapy, you can call the BLS. We all set up the template, and then we're activating and we're doing the bilateral. So it makes sense to me why they're saying that, because you're activating the trauma. So Dr. Scare would say one foot is in the movie, like you're activating the trauma, but it's the bilateral, his belief and the fMRIs, that's actually keeping the person grounded. And I find that's fascinating to me. So it's the bilateral that's inhibiting the amygdala to be able to help someone reprocess that trauma. So outside of therapy, I would never say, for example, last year in a community that just is 45 minutes from us, they had major, major flood damage, and it affected, if I'm guessing, probably 300 homes, maybe more. And so when I'm working with them on grounding techniques, I would never say to them, I want you to think about the flood and hold the taps. I would never do that, but just the tapping alone and other calming resources actually just calms them down really, really well. So I think it's a term that's just specific for EMDR therapy, and it's okay, but it's not the same outside of therapy. Then it becomes bilateral coordinated movement.
Yeah.
That
And
makes sense.
it does make sense. And it does sound like you have the bilateral stimulation, which is your back and forth, but your dual activation stimulation, if you really think about it, involves the brain and the one foot in the past and the one foot in the present.
Yeah, because you're actually in the template, you're saying, what's the worst part? What's the negative cognition? Like you're actually bringing that up to help them move through that. And so, but outside of therapy, even really highly traumatized people, um, it's actually just calming them down. And we see it over and over and over again. I work with really high end trauma and a lot of community trauma, and we see it over and over again, that it's a calming resource, and that's the beauty of it. And I think that's the expansive nature of it, that we can help a lot of people, because even when it was the mass shooting in Las Vegas in 2017, because I'm in Southern Utah, then I'm called upon. I was a regional coordinator at the time, so then I'm called upon basically to lead that out, and I had actually done Dr. Herrero's training twice, but then to actually do that in front of a group of highly traumatized people, I'm like talking to him. I was so scared to do that, but to do the group protocol several times, including with middle school students. And then from there to do the RTEP protocol with those that needed it, the highly, highly traumatized people. I just want you to know that even non-drinkers were drinking, because they could not, even with all the intensive treatment, it was so intense what they went through. I just said to them, one-on-one adults, I just said, I want you to see if you take these with you and you use them to help you sleep and to help you at work to concentrate, just see if it helps you. If it's not good, just turn it off. If it helps you, let me know. And every single one of them reported positive. And that's where that was clear back when we were first coming out with this. And so that's where it gave me the courage to just keep working with highly traumatized people and to use the tapping and some other things I'll share later, just as a calming resource. And it actually is helping them sleep. There's no way I would have gotten them to wear earbuds to listen to tones or even music. They just wanted to hear because they were really in hyper arousal. So outside of EMDR therapy, it truly just becomes a standalone resource. And Mark Grant would say, yeah, because he studied it since the 1990s.
Mhm.
So,
And Cindy, this is one of the reasons why I want to talk to you, because not only do you have a lot of experience, but you also have a lot of passion in this as well, like to the point where you've created something to help people experience this. So I want to turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, you know, those all of us, I think if we all raised our hand, you don't have to, but we're all working at max capacity. It's just true. And it doesn't matter if you're in private practice. It doesn't matter if you're in community mental health. A couple weeks ago, I talked to all the state directors of the juvenile justice centers throughout Utah. Everybody is maxed out. And so, even 6 years ago, I mean, at that time I was in private practice. I had 8 therapists working for me. We all had very long waiting lists. It was a college town. The college is overflowing. So now they're asking the community. And of course, we're the ones trained in EMDR therapy. So we got a lot of calls. And it just honestly is a recipe for burnout. But how do you say no to people when they're calling you completely in crisis and traumatized, and it's, what do you do? And so the lady that actually helped create these, she is a non-therapist. She was the billing admin person for the practice. And I want you to know, this is what she said to me one day. She said, Cindy, that when you do tapping, I think most of you know this. I don't think I'm new to understanding that if someone comes in out of their window and they held the tappers that you have, and it's a slower pace that calms them down. I think a lot of you know that. And I even had therapists say, yeah, I've been putting those under my thighs to do my paperwork. Like, I think a lot of us started to understand there was expanded uses of it. But Haley actually just said, why don't you do what you're doing in session? And why don't we just create a product that's actually user friendly that can be used by the general public? And I want you to know, I told her that wasn't really a very practical idea, just because of the training that we get, this is a no-no. But just as I continue to experiment a little bit, I just realized she was right. And so we just worked with some engineers, and we were really clear what we wanted to do different from what what else is out there. And the difference is we wanted them to tap. Because so I just think in the beginning, is either eye movement or tapping. And if you couldn't do those, then equipment came. And so then they tried to create equipment. And I think they did a really great job, but it doesn't feel like tapping. And that's okay, it works. But we wanted to do something that felt like, if they're on their own, even I'll read this little excerpt from Francine. She's talking about in getting past your past, she's talking about tapping on their thighs. And if it works, keep doing it. So we wanted to replicate tapping so that it seemed the same if they were tapping or tapping their feet back. But it was really important, the tapping. And the other thing that was really important to us is we wanted wristbands, the wristband option, because as a trauma therapist, sometimes people, they want to do somatic stuff with their hands and do different things. So I just wanted their hands freed up to be able to do that. Or if they needed to stand up, they were still getting the bilateral stimulation. So that was one of the things that was really important. And another training that really influenced me was when I went to Craig Penner's trainings. I went to 2 of his, and he doesn't use equipment. He just does tapping. It's just tapping. And so he was one of my first ones too. I went to so many advanced trainings in the beginning, just because I wanted to really bring it to the region and do a really good job. And I could just tell the difference between tapping and the vibration. I just liked it better. And so that would be another influencer. We just wanted to replicate the same feel, that if they didn't have the tappers, they could still tap on their thighs and it felt the same. So that was really important to us. And so yeah, we've created that, and we've worked, I would say, tirelessly in just working with, just to give you an idea of some of it. I mean, we can get into it more, but just with schools and children's justice centers and women's crisis centers, like I just said, the juvenile justice system, we're able to just really provide a resource that is calming people down, that's non-invasive. So I'm not against medication at all, but this is a really cool thing. And when the pandemic happened, I just want you to know, like our local mental health agency, they bought several sets, and they let their clients check them out like library books. And it was phenomenal, because at that time we'd had the ability to have our system integrate so that we could do remote and have the therapist control the tapping, and they were able to still continue to get treatment even in these rural areas. So it's pretty exciting. So
that is exciting. And Cindy, it makes me think, like, because I know, like, you were talking, and This idea of bilateral stimulation being a therapy tool compared to a general use tool, because I know whenever I was growing up in the EMDR community, there was some really, hey, BLS, nope, that's just for the therapy, you know, don't take it outside of session. Just as you're here, the exploration you've done, the experiences that you've had with the Bi-Tapp Kit, for any of us that are still like hesitant of like, oh, wait a second, I wasn't trained like that. That this is something that therapists should have. What's your thoughts on that? And how can you ease our souls a little bit that, hey, this is okay?
I'm just smiling because I just want you to know I was trained that same way. I'm going to just read this excerpt out of Francine's Getting Past Your Past, but I was trained the same way. And I just want to say that I feel like, I mean, even when I had a therapist working for me, you feel very responsible for their quality of work, right? You're trying as the supervisor, the director, like you feel responsible. And so if someone does a bad job, you know, you're going to be the one assuming that client and helping that be right. So now be Francine. And, you know, you feel really responsible, I would think, for the level of care that's going out there. And I just don't know, back in the 1980s, I actually feel like this. I just don't think they had the ability to do the fMRIs and to really see what it's doing. So I know there was a lot of theories about it, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I think they're just doing what they knew to do at the time. But in her book, so just know that this book is for the general public. Okay. And so on page 56, she's teaching them. She says, adding bilateral stimulation. She's teaching them how to create a safe, calm place on their own. And she's talking about putting your hands on your thighs, tapping, you know, alternating. But then Tom, is where this comes from. This is what she said. We don't do long sets, and we don't do it very rapidly, because the very rapid or long sets that we use in EMDR reprocessing can sometimes bring up an unpleasant association as new memories emerge. So I think it started there, and I think it's just been taught. And I was trained through the Institute. So just the fear of that. And so my rebuttal would be, I personally don't believe it's the bilateral stimulation that is the issue. I think it's the unprocessed trauma. I think it's just you already have unprocessed trauma, and then you're starting to talk about it and you're starting to set up a template about it. That's the activating. This is actually inhibiting the amygdala so you can actually reprocess the trauma. That's my belief. But then on the same, just down a little bit, page 57, she just said, if bilateral stimulation helps, then use it daily. So there's a couple of thoughts I would have is either she really had that theory that it could activate, which she probably did, and it's okay. I would rather her be safe than reckless, and I want to be safe rather than reckless. So I don't know, either she really thought it or she's just doing her due diligence, or both. But in the very same little section, she's saying that if it helps, use it daily. And I don't think she would do a book to the public and add that if she didn't have a little bit of awareness that it would be okay. I think it was super taboo there. I just don't think that sentence would be in there. That's just my personal opinion, though.
Okay. Well, why don't I'm looking at our time. Why don't we do our interactive exercise that we've been talking about? So in anything you want to throw in before that would be great.
Yeah, I'll just super quick, just because we don't have time in such a short amount of time. I would just go to our website and again, not to sell tappers, but just to expose you to information. And if you were on bitapp.com, I would go to the blog. I would look at the one on the firemen, the first responders. It's phenomenal, the work we're doing with first responders. I would look at the one in October, a lady who unfortunately witnessed a really tragic domestic violence incident, and how she used the tappers, including they let her use them to testify in court. And why that's phenomenal is because when you're on the stand and you're having to testify, you know, about a tragedy that involved your best friend, it's hard to get those words out, but the tappers allowed her to calm that amygdala down, so then her prefrontal cortex could have the language to testify. And so I just want you to know, in Southern Utah, it's being used, and it's being used in classrooms. It's just being used in a lot of ways. So if you were on the blog, or if you went under uses, you go under general use. It's used in addiction recovery right now. It's used in schools. And then there's a news section. Like there's a lot of great information about how we're using the tappers. And so it's all on there. And of course, I'm always available to talk. So, all right. So should we switch over really quick?
Yeah, I'll let you keep running.
Okay. So we're going to do the activity, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So we'll see if Cindy can do this. Okay. All right. So I'm going to just go, let's see. All right. So this is one of the handouts when I'm working, whether it's with a family, an individual, or community school. This is one of the things that's on the website, and I'm going to just do this with you. This order is intentional. I've played with the order because I work with highly traumatized people, and this is the order that seems to calm people down the most. So what I want you to do, I'm going to do it too, is, and I'll just walk you through it, but I want you to, we're going to tap on the top of our thighs. So you can just close your eyes and you won't be able to see me completely, but just tap on the top of your thighs and just go back and forth. And I just want you just to tune in with how you're feeling right now, whether it's stressful, if you have big appointments coming up, maybe it's stress over the weekend, or you're looking forward to something over the weekend, but just tune in with how you feel in your body. Next thing I want you to do is I want you to do movement. So you don't have to stand up and move. You can, but you also can just stretch your arms out, or you can go up. You can just roll your shoulders. You can have your legs come out and stretch your legs. If you have something to drink next to you, then I just want you to take a drink right now. So just take a drink. If you don't, I just want you to mindfully swallow. Just swallow. And the next thing I want you to do is just to take a really deep breath. The last thing is connection. If we were in a setting where there was someone else, you could share how you feel, but even just by yourself, you can just connect with yourself and just check in and see how you're feeling right now. And this sequence, just stop sharing. This sequence is what we teach. And what I want you to know is that if you're able to start with inhibiting the amygdala, and then you do a little bit of movement, that's actually releasing cortisol too. And then we know if you take a drink of water, you probably all know this, it activates the digestive system, and then take a deep breath. And because if any of you have ever had a panic attack or been around someone that does, asking them to take a deep breath is impossible. But if they do those first three things, then they're actually spontaneously able to take a deep breath on their own. And so that's the order that we teach. And if someone doesn't have the tappers, it's okay. They can tap on their thighs, or they can tap in their shoes back and forth. And as far as that drinking water, even our local community mental health agency, even if someone if you came to see me in my office, I'm going to give you a drink of water, whether you ask for one or not. It's just by you. It's just part of the standard, the culture I'm creating. But at Southwest Center, it's a local mental health agency. They have little bottles of water. And so that if a client comes in agitated, they're able to hand them a drink of water, and they're able to say, here's a drink of water. And if you go sit in that chair right over there, then your therapist will be right out. So see how they're getting coordinated bilateral, they're getting movement. It's coordinated, and they take a drink of water. So the first three things are happening like that without their clients even being aware that we just help down regulate them a little bit. So
that is so neat. Like just how whenever you start thinking about the big picture, how you can really put in a lot of healing and a lot of science without too much effort. So that's really neat, Cindy.
Yeah, we're teaching like schools and even the secretary. It's just the same little things, just handing someone, or say, there's a water fountain just right down there. How about you just take a quick drink, come right back. And those little motions are actually just settling people down. So
Cindy, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for just coming in and sharing your thoughts and sharing your experience. For those who know me or don't know me, I'm a big fan of the golden nugget at the end of things. So I want to ask you, as someone who's just spent the past 30 minutes talking about bilateral stimulation, what's the golden nugget that you're taking away, or that you want to toss at people and hope that they take away?
I think the biggest one is just an awareness that bilateral coordination has been a part of our lives since the beginning, and that we are engaged in it every single day. So.
That is a great golden nugget. So for those of you that are attending, stick around because you are going to be eligible to not only ask Cindy any questions that you want to ask, but I'll also let you know how you can win your own Bi-Tapp kit. So as well as a 1-hour consultation with me if you want that. So stick around. For those of us, for those of you that are joining on the web, thank you for joining us. So, and thank you again, Cindy, for just coming and talking with us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.